And thanks for joining us. My name is Jared McGriff. I'm head of product marketing for HyperTrack, and really appreciate you joining us for this webinar on backfilling last-minute cancellations. This is really a solution showcase, which will be led by Ram Kakkad, VP of Product with HyperTrack, Saurabh Das, who's VP of Engineering, and Aashish Subramanian, who's Director of Engineering with HyperTrack. And the reason we wanted to do this session is to follow up conversations we had during Shiftwork Summit, where we did this in September. And there we realized that many of our Shiftwork marketplace customers, as well as even employers in the space, have critical time and attendance issues that have impact relating to both revenue and retention for both customers as well as for the workers on the platforms. So we wanted to do this session to follow up on those issues and do a deep dive around how Shiftwork marketplaces solve backfilling for last-minute cancellation. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to Ram, who will lead the discussion here. Thanks a lot, Ram.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Cool. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on backfilling last-minute cancellations for Shiftwork marketplaces. As Jared mentioned, this is a continuation of the events we've been hosting here at HyperTrack on how you can use live location to automate Shiftwork validation. In the last webinar, roughly a month ago, we covered the secret to no-show detection. And today we'll be focused on backfilling last-minute cancellations, which occur whenever a worker who you've identified for a shift essentially cancels it last minute, and now you're left kind of figuring out how to fulfill the shift that you've already committed to your employer to. Now, to get started, let's understand where in the life cycle of a shift or a Shiftwork marketplace's workflow this becomes relevant. So at a very high level, when you're a marketplace matching employers to workers, you largely have 4 stages in your life cycle. There's the onboarding stage where you onboard the employer and the worker and do all the validations, etc., understand their skills and requirements. Then there is the scheduling where you source the shifts from the employer, and you may have workers pre-declare shifts, or in case of an on-demand marketplace, they might just opt in for shifts that they see. But after a shift has been matched to a worker, there's this third piece where the work actually occurs and you need to validate it and track the proof of work so that ultimately you can validate it and make a payment. And typically you won't have, feet on the street actually monitoring the work. This is going to be a remote work scenario where you don't have eyes on the ground. And live location basically becomes a critical core piece of this third part where automation can be enforced. And that's where HyperTrack comes in, and that's where live location comes in. Some of the things that you need to do here are managing time and attendance, logging work done, managing clock in and clock out and break times, etc. And that's essentially where we come in. Now, after you've actually matched a shift to a worker, the shift can evolve in many ways. So typically what you'd like to see happen most often is the happy path. So you've scheduled the work days in advance or at least 24 hours in advance. The worker goes there on time with no problem, spends as much time as expected, gets all the proofs and validations required that the work has been completed, and then you automate the payment. And these days, we're also seeing same-day payment as becoming more of the norm, and customers are moving to that very, very sort of intentfully. But when the happy path does not occur, you can see a lot of different scenarios emerge. So one is time and attendance dispute. So in this case, the worker actually shows up on site, but may not spend the required amount of time, or they might leave early, or they might take long breaks and just show up at the clock out time. So that's one type of dispute you can have. There is, of course, the no-call, no-show dispute, which we spoke about in the last webinar. In that case, the worker commits to the shift, but just never shows up. And an hour after the shift has started, you get a call from a disgruntled floor manager saying, "Hey, where's my worker?" And finally, there's also the late cancellation case where a worker gets an emergency on the day of and needs to cancel very late, which leaves the marketplace kind of holding the bag on who should be doing the work. Now, one of the interesting dynamics we see in the marketplace today is interplay between no-call, no-show rates and late cancellation rates. So to prevent the no-call, no-show rate, which is really the worst scenario that can occur, what some marketplaces do is they have heavy penalties on workers who just don't show up without any notice. So what this does is they also allow very kind of relaxed cancellation policies where you can cancel the shift even up to an hour before the shift is expected to start. So what happens in this case is that you might artificially suppress your no-call, no-show rate because workers have now started calling in late to cancel, but then your late cancellation rate will actually go up, which essentially leaves you trying to figure out in an urgent situation who can do the job. So depending on where the marketplace has kind of tailored its no-call, no-show and late cancellation policies, you'll see some balance of these two metrics. And today's focus is going to be on how can you solve the late cancellation issue. So speaking a bit about the no-show business impact, we covered this in the last webinar, so I won't go into it very deeply, but this is the ultimate trust buster for any marketplace. You can find a recording of our previous webinar on our website if you'd like to get up to speed on that aspect of things. We spoke a little bit about the time and attendance disputes that can occur, and this will be a subject of one of our future webinars as well. But in these cases, you want to know for the worker who showed up, how much time did they spend on site? When did they arrive? Were they there for the expected amount of time, etc.? So this too can be automated, but we'll cover this in a future webinar. I think coming to the interesting topic for today, which is what do you do about late cancellations? And, let's start by seeing what we actually see in the marketplace today. So usually today when customers or when marketplaces encounter a late cancel, they have a system in place where they can broadcast the shift to workers with a good reputation or whose home location is close to the shift destination. But this has issues for a number of reasons. The worker's live location in an urgent scenario is very, very relevant and often determining in terms of who can actually do it. And so when you offer this to customers based on these stale criteria, you often see, high churn rate, high rejection rate, et cetera, and ultimately you're not able to fill the shift. And what does that lead to? The age-old problems of lower fill rate, lower revenue, and ultimately eroding customer trust because they depended on you for a worker. Or, imagine a nurse wanting to go to a hospital or needing to go to a hospital and not having a nurse at the bedside. I mean, we're all well aware of the impact of not having a worker show up when committed. So we do see some attempts by teams to try and implement live location because it's obvious that it can help solve some of these problems. But live location is a hairy beast, and usually for bespoke implementations that are not specialized enough, we see reliability of location being about 50 to 60%, which ultimately leads to unreliable automation because you can't automate the process when you're blind that often. We also see sort of point-in-time locations being used, which don't give you a recent enough view of where the worker is, and again, aren't reliable enough. This also adds engineering complexity because you need to manage OS sensor tech, you need to manage privacy based on each OS, maps data and clouds data, and all of this is typically non-core expertise for a shift work marketplace. All of this adds to explosion in cost on the cloud and map side, and doesn't even give you a reliable solution. So, all of these things mean that you can't really use bespoke implementations and you need a partner. So coming to the focus of today, the solution we have to help you backfill last-minute cancellations is the nearby search. Nearby search can be used in a number of ways. One is in conjunction with the pre-shift tracking when you've detected a no-show is going to occur and you now need to backfill it at the last moment. Or if you get an actual signal from a worker that they're going to do a late cancellation, like an hour before the shift is expected to occur. Or in some cases, your end employer customer might actually give you an urgent shift because something fell through on their side and they need you to fill something urgently. And so nearby search can be used in any one of those three scenarios. How it all works. So at the root of it, from a location standpoint, we get the location from the device of the worker through your worker app. And we get that by adding the HyperTrack SDK to your worker app. So that's one piece of integration that you'll need to do. And on the cloud API side, you essentially need to integrate the nearby API, which sends HyperTrack a query for find a worker at the shift destination. And we'll essentially use the location that we're tracking to give you a list of workers sorted by who can reach there fast or who's the closest to help you make the decision on, on who to allocate the work to. So ultimately, it's important to know that you control that decision. We add the location context with high reliability and accuracy so that you can make the right decision at the right time. So, with that overview, I'd like to invite my colleague Saurabh Das to walk through some of the engineering nuances of this and how we sort of make it all work together. So, Saurabh, would you like to take over?
Thanks, Ram. Just getting my video out. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Um, all right. I assume I'm audible and you can see my screen, so we'll get started. So yeah, Ram spoke about, the need for last minute backfills, and essentially the three scenarios that really play out for it. Those are typically sort of late cancellations, which happen on the day of the shift. There are no call, no shows, which happen up to 1 hour before you can start detecting no call, no shows about 45 minutes to about 30 before the shift to about 30 minutes after the shift. We spoke about this in detail in the previous webinar. Jared can share a link to that. Uh, and the concept being it's better for a replacement worker to show up late than not at all. And the third one being immediate shifts where a sudden or unscheduled high demand means that a worker is required right away, or if a worker has to leave for any number of urgent reasons and we need a replacement person right away. So given this kind of scenario, there is a certain amount of time pressure to get a replacement worker onto a shift. And essentially, what are the things that we need to successfully backfill a shift in an urgent manner? We need three things. These are that the worker should be nearby, the worker should be eligible, and the worker should be available. And I'm going to talk in detail about each of these. So what do I mean when I say that the worker should be nearby? Um, so let's take a look at an example. This was a shift that was marked as a no-show about 20 minutes before the shift. And the worker has been marked as a likely no-show, and this shift needs to be backfilled right away. So the first thing we do as we go through nearby search is that the first consideration is that the worker should be able to get to the shift in a timely manner. Um, so so what we do is that we sort of draw lines of how far away each worker is from the shift, hypothetically on a map. And here what happens is the legacy methods use a home location or an office location as a default, but that is too static and stale. Knowing the worker location with a high degree of accuracy is a requirement when you need to backfill with urgency. So location tracking and location intelligence is the key to understanding which workers are nearby. So when workers are not working in shift work marketplaces, they are very highly averse to being tracked, with good reason, I might add. So as a fleet, we don't want to be tracking a worker if they aren't working. We don't want to be tracking a worker if they're not expecting to be tracked at that point in time. So even though your app may have got an always allow tracking permission, we don't want to activate it if they don't expect it. So we'll touch upon this a bit more when we discuss availability as well. But even so, depending on how your app is designed and how your workers interact with your app, HyperTrack's goal here is to get as much information as possible about the worker's current location without actively tracking the worker. And we also want to significantly reduce usage of network and usage of battery to a bare minimum. So those are two major goals in this as well. So on this map, we see the shift here. Now the green dots are workers for him. We have a current live location. We know they're there with a very high degree of certainty. The red dots you see, these ones, would be a worker whose location was known in the past, but not very recently. Um, so there is that confidence factor. This location might be stale, and we'll factor that into the next steps as well. For others, we have these hexagons, which are inferred commonly spends time here location. Often their home locations. Some workers have one, others might have two or three, depending on how they move through the day. And also a good thing to understand here is not every fleet has all of these. Some ask us not to infer the home location. Some ask us to do so. So depending on how your fleet is set up, you could have some of these or all of these. Um, so I think that access to live location in this scenario is a worthy competitive advantage. And specifically so because reliably tracking workers is a massive challenge. And if you have workers that you can't reach and you don't send an invitation to because you don't know where they are, that's not a great scenario. So having something, technology that maintains contact with the app is quite important from a technical perspective. So HyperTrack takes all this information, and based on this, we have a candidate set that we can start working with. And that's what I mean by the worker should be nearby. Let's find as many workers as reliably as we can who could possibly get to the shift and fill it up. So then we move to the second important thing, which is that the worker should be eligible. So we have this candidate set that we discussed in the previous map. Um, and what we notice, and this is particularly key in healthcare marketplaces, but in my experience, every marketplace, be it healthcare, light industrial, hospitality, everyone has some certifications or skills that need to be matched. And on the surface, it might seem simple. It might seem that it's the case of just filtering what the candidate said. And yes, if the list is small enough, you can simply just filter it out, go through each item and see if it matches or not. However, what we do know is that, particularly in big cities, the candidate set gets quite dense, and it is then hard to filter and find the candidates needed easily. There are other cases also, even in non-dense cities, where if the number of qualifications that are possible are large or the number of constraints are large, it leads to a situation where there's like a uniqueness factor to the shift or the worker, and that becomes a bottleneck, and you have to like scan through hundreds of workers to find a single eligible worker, and then do filtering, it becomes difficult. So what HyperTrack aims to do here is it takes ownership of the tangled location plus filtering problem. Now, if you had to just filter, it's reasonably a solved problem. You know how to do this. If it's but when it comes to location plus filtering, it is significantly more complicated. And so what HyperTrack does is, as I said, it takes ownership of this problem and abstract the problem away. So you don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about having different algorithms for cities versus non-cities, or you don't need to worry that if you already have 10 qualifications. If you add one more, you don't worry that it's going to be a lot more compute to a lot more time to get your eligible set. Like we've done the legwork there to understand how to get to these responses in a timely manner for various scenarios. Um, so yeah, so based on this filtering, we will reduce our candidate set, and we'll have a smaller set of workers who can fulfill the shift and are likely to get there in a timely manner. So then we come to our third key function for backfilling with urgency, which is that the worker should be available. And I'll discuss how this is a little different from eligible. So we now have workers which are eligible and nearby. We could send a request to all of them to take the shift, but there could be some issues here. One is that the worker may already be working. And in this example, there was another worker already working at this destination. And if we send an urgent shift request to this worker, that will incentivize shift abandonment for the other shift. You also have workers working at a nearby facility for the same customer, and you do not want to send them this kind of a request either. But the most common case here is that the worker just isn't working right now. Shift work marketplaces exist to provide flexibility to workers and where they choose when they want to work, and where they want to work. So there is often a large pool of workers who do not want to receive this notification right now. So that's why there is this need for this very highly dynamic availability capability, which HyperTrack does provide. Now, what we do is we put the control of how this works in the hands of the marketplace. And what I mean by that is that you could choose to put a button in your app that allows the worker themselves to say that, hey, I'm available, or hey, I'm not available. And if they mark themselves as available, that's a very high signal that they will accept a shift that is given to them. It also improves tracking behavior a lot from the worker side, because they know that they have to track well to get shifts, which means that we see the entire fleet's behavior improving in these cases. And And in other marketplaces, you choose to not have the flag, the toggle for the worker. The advantage there is that, there's no active work required for the worker to keep marking themselves available or not available. And then you try and use other methods like when did they last check the app or other information to try and determine how up to date they are. HyperTrack, by knowing when we last knew their location, also provides a lot of information and signal in these cases. So, and if a worker is already on a shift, HyperTrack already automatically marks them as unavailable. So, so what we do is, yeah, and as I said, the flag is a highly dynamic one. It can shift very quickly. That's how it's different from eligibility. So, so based on how the marketplace wants their workers to be to determine their availability, the various ways of doing that, as I said. From there, using that piece of information, we finally arrive at a smaller set, a reasonably small set, who we know can reach the set on time, will be able to fulfill the shift, and are likely to accept this shift. And then you can, try and reach these workers, call, text on the app, however else, to try and get them to fill the shift. And, our urgent shifts are usually priced higher than regular shifts, so there is a good chance that one of these workers will pick up your shift and, hopefully arrive at the location before the shift start time, but, better late than never, as they say. So, that's how nearby search works at HyperTrack, and just end with saying that, if you need to not worry about backfilling much, just use HyperTrack. So with that, I'll pass it on to Ashish, who will take us through a demo of how this works. Ashish, over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Saurabh. Let me go ahead and share screen. Let me know my screen is visible.
Yep.
Yeah. So hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this webinar on backfilling for last-minute cancellations using HyperTrack. We're excited to have you here, and let's jump right into this demo. So today, our customers span across different industries and verticals. They work in healthcare, they work in light industrial, retail, and hospitality, right? Our customers rely on our product to track thousands of shifts on a daily basis. And here what we see is a subset of these shifts happening both in the city of San Francisco and Berkeley. And we also see the workers and their locations who are on their way to fulfill these shifts. Now, your workers can be, say, nurses, they can be clinicians, they could be forklift operators, they could be warehouse associates, for example, depending on your industry. And they are the people who onboard onto your marketplace in order to pick up shifts and make sure that your customers are happy with the work that's being done, right? Now, on any given day, there's always a possibility of cancellations, right? So, for example, workers can get sick. They could, a mom could have a kid who got sick and can't make it the shift today, or, for example, their car breaks down and they can't make it on time to the shift, and they end up canceling the shift. And this often leaves you in a place where you're scrambling to find the right worker for the shift. Because the shift requires a certain skill and you need a particular worker with those skills in order to fulfill this. And also it needs to happen at the right time, right? And this is where HyperTrack comes in. So we're able to provide you with the right set of workers for the given job based on different criteria. And three of these criteria that we look at are, firstly, availability. Are the workers available for picking up the shift? The second is skills or the eligibility, right? So every job has a requirement and the worker needs to be able to fulfill that requirement. So skill matching is important here. And thirdly, the proximity, right? So you have a commitment to your customer that the shift will happen at a particular time, and you want to keep up that promise. So you want workers who can actually make it to the shift location at the right time. So let's walk through each of these different scenarios. So here we see some cancellations, but you still have time to fulfill them of 4:30, 5:15, and so on. So let's take a look at each of these different criteria now. So let's start off with availability. Now, here you see your fleet or roster that is currently available. We provide the ability to see the location of these workers currently on the map. And here we see they're distributed between Berkeley and San Francisco. Now, we have different ways in which our customers manage availability, and HyperTrack as a product is flexible to accommodate how your business wants to handle that. Now, one way in which they do it is they empower their workers to do it. So the ability to mark whether they're available or not is transferred to the worker through the application that they run on their mobile device. And the other scenario we've seen is this is standard timing, say 9 to 6 p.m., 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And availability automatically turns on at 9 a.m. and automatically turns off at 6 p.m. Now, let's take an example of the dynamic availability. So here, this is me right now. And as you can see, I'm not tracking, I'm not available. I'm going to go ahead and set my availability on my app. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, so we should now be able to see this. Let's look for me. And there you go. Just like that, I'm available at this instant to pick up shifts, right? So the next thing we want to look at after availability is the eligibility and skill matching. So HyperTrack provides you a way to associate different skills, one or more skills, with your worker. And over time, we understand that workers could get more certifications and keep developing their skills. And you can dynamically change this at any point in time and update the worker with the particular skill. So in our example here today, we see that we have a bunch of healthcare workers. You see Rihanna has like IV therapy and blood draws as a skill. Jason Kent has acute and critical care and so on. So each of these skills are associated with the worker, and we'll see how we can get to the right set of workers for a particular shift with this information. Now, the third part is the proximity, right? So let's take a look at an example here, and it's a simulation. So we have a set of about 10 workers with different skills. They are available. So there's an availability set from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So they're all available, and you can see their locations on the map. Now, this particular order has been canceled, and you're looking for somebody to fulfill this. Now, we see that there's a requirement for this particular shift, and the skill required here is patient assessment and monitoring. Let's go ahead and run the nearby API and see what results it gives us, right? So quickly looking at this. All right. And just like that, you have this set of 5 workers here who have the right skills matching this particular requirement. And the distances and ETAs, right? So this is important because this information allows you to either select a particular worker, or you can send out the shift to a set of workers in order to make sure that it's fulfilled at the right time. So yeah, just like that, with a single API call, we have the availability, the eligibility and the proximity bundled in to give you the right set of workers for your canceled shift at the right time, ensuring that your customers in the end are happy. That's all for the demo today. I'm going to hand it back to Jared for questions. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Aashish, and everyone else. In terms of questions, it looks like there's one question here around implementation time. So the question is, how long does it take to implement the solution that you demoed, and then also what would the engineering resources be? Would the engineering resources be associated with that?
Yeah, I can take it. So yeah, implementation, typically a Hello World implementation will probably take like a day to drop the SDK and make the API call. After that, there's of course some more integration required on the back end as well as on the consumption of information side to go to production full scale. That can take like 3 to 6 weeks, depending on how fast the customer can move. It's basically you've integrated the APIs, you now need to make sure your views are getting the right information, your webhooks are being consumed, and things like that. So the resources required would be some amount of mobile engineering, depending on the type of stack you have on the mobile side, some backend engineering that's minimum to sort of integrate the API as well as mobile. And depending on how you're applying to do the ops views, if you're embedding our views, then some basic front end expertise to embed the view in the right place, which is quite lightweight. Oh, you're on mute, Jared.
Yeah, quickly, sorry. Quickly, another question is around customization. So I noticed that, we have this eligibility aspect, and we talked about a few industries. So how do customers customize the eligibility components within the solution that they deliver to their environment?
Yeah, Saurabh, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I think so HyperTrack being sort of an API driven platform is extremely customizable, for whatever kind of marketplace, and with the kind of rules that you have specifically for your marketplace. Um, so we have marketplaces in all kinds of industries with all kinds of different requirements. And because we provide the building blocks, but we are not sort of prescriptive about exactly how they can be used. These building blocks can be mixed and matched and used in various different ways to sort of, fulfill the pain points that you have around sort of this location infrastructure piece.
Got it. Cool. Thanks for that. And it looks like that's it for questions.
So
Any other
I do see a
comments?
couple more questions. I think maybe Zoom is not sort of working, but I see a question around location tracking accuracy and what types of location tracking accuracy do you see before HyperTrack and what's the improvement after HyperTrack? In terms of accuracy itself, if you're talking about, just am I getting a location accurate to 3 meters or 5 meters, HyperTrack will be as accurate as the device can provide a location. What HyperTrack does do additionally is, you need to have, say, a live location for a particular use case. HyperTrack puts a lot of effort into making sure that the location you have is known with reliability. So if you're saying that the person is at this place with 5 meters reliability accuracy, they are there, and if they go some distance away, we will give you a new live location. And we do that while consuming the least amount of battery and the least amount of network activity that we can do. So that is one of the benefits that that the HyperTrack does work very hard to provide. So yeah, I just quickly covered waking up your devices quickly, making sure that they continue tracking. And this is a very hairy problem because of the number of devices and the number of OSs that are there, particularly on Android, where each device manufacturer has its own set of things that you need to take into account to make sure that it works. And yeah, as I said, track your workers without consuming the battery, without consuming their network too much, and also information about when it's not working. Jared, I see one more question here
Right.
about what
Backfill.
is what is the improvement on backfills with the solution from HyperTrack? I mean, we have a customer with a 98% fill rate. I think Ram, maybe you want to talk a little more about that case.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
and they do achieve that because they can backfill with HyperTrack.
Yeah, I mean, we've typically seen, once you do broadcast shifts to nearby workers who have, indicated an availability for a shift, the acceptance rates are high in the 80 to 90% range. And so that helps you claw back, a whole chunk of the last minute cancels that you see. So of course, things are dependent on the industry, but yeah, we do see high acceptance rates for urgent shifts that are posted to workers who are in the vicinity.
Cool. So could you estimate any percentage improvement at all? I mean, I know that we're up, some have 98% fill rate, but just on
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, as I said, you'll be able to fill about 80 to 90% of them using the nearby search functionality. So that's how much you'll be able to claw back. I think depending on the nature of the current solution that a lot of customers don't apply anything. So
right.
this is
Okay.
creating value that you can accrue. Stay locations will typically fill much fewer than that because workers are usually not at their home location all the time and things like that. So yeah, it depends on the context there. But yeah, we've seen customers who didn't have anything for last minute actually claw back that much.
Cool. All right, awesome. So yeah, that looks like that's about it for questions.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly to Ram's answer about this. And if you have, so Ram spoke about if you don't have an implementation versus if you have use HyperTrack. We've also seen cases where there's a naive implementation or an implementation using a different API. And because HyperTrack puts a lot of work into waking up devices and sort of knowing what they are, even when they don't precisely know, because we want to serve this use case, a lot more devices are known to where they are. I would estimate that we can wake up devices about particularly iOS devices in about half the amount of time that anybody else can, and that does give you much more information, and that therefore gives you much better backfill rate on that. While I don't have an exact number on a comparison between that and HyperTrack, as Ram shared, we do see high fill rates with HyperTrack, and we can work with your marketplace to understand what the challenges are and how you can use live location to solve those.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for those answers and that clarity. I think that's about it in terms of questions and the content for this webinar. So thanks everyone for joining. Definitely appreciate your engagement here, and I'm glad we had a chance to walk through this important topic for shift work marketplaces. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.